What's up guys, welcome back to Fancy Goldfish Fanatics. Today we're going to be doing another episode of Rate My Tank, so make sure you stay tuned to find out more. Hey Fanatics family, welcome back. As always, check out those links in the description. Make sure to check out Star Fisheries and Jimmy Goldfish USA. And also, if you aren't already, make sure you're following us on Instagram. The link is down below. So today's video, we are going to be doing another episode of Rate My Tank. I believe we've also got a couple of ponds in there. So if you haven't watched the Rate My Tank series before, basically we have a multitude of different tanks and different ponds on the video, and then we go through them looking at the positives and things that maybe we would change about them or potentially add to improve the fish's life, for example, or improve the quality of the system. And then at the end of each clip we give them a rating out of 5 stars. And we've had so many tanks already on the series. If you want to check out the other videos that we've done on the Rate My Tank series, then you can check them out in the playlist, the Rate My Tank playlist. We've got lots of ponds and lots of tanks on there. So without further ado, let's get some of these ponds and tanks up on the screen and let's check them out. So first up, we have this absolutely stunning Tamasaba and Ryukin tank. I absolutely love the scape of this tank. Generally, I like more of the bare tanks for Fancy Goldfish, but the owner of this tank has done an absolutely brilliant job with that huge jungle of Vallisneria, and I'm really loving the fact that they've used those wood pieces and rocks as well to create a minimalistic scape that is easy to maintain, easy to clean, easy to get the gravel vac in there to hoover the sand, but also kept it nice and open for the fish to have a little bit of interaction with the scape. They've got a few tunnels, holes, etc. to go through, and not only does this tank provide a lovely scape and aquascape to look at, but it also provides the fish some natural areas to forage and a more natural feel to the tank. I'm really loving the high quality selection of fish we have as well, and not only that, but they look to be in really good condition. Looks like the wood or rocks isn't causing them any problems. Often you can have problems with sharp stones, sharp pieces of wood where the fish maybe knock into them because they are a little bit clumsy than more streamlined fish like a tetra, for example, so they can knock into them. But it looks like the owner has selected some nice smooth stones, and the wood looks fairly smooth as well, which shouldn't cause any problems. There are no protrusions which could damage the fish, and the fish look to be in real good health. I'm really loving the cleanliness of this tank as well. Looks really nice, and the owner's done definitely a very good job and has been really thinking about the scape as well. But the main feature are the fish, and I absolutely love them. Ryukin are definitely one of my favourite. The Tamasaba look absolutely beautiful as well. The colours are really nice and really standing out on these fish. I can't quite tell what filters we have on the tank, but it looks like there are some sort of canister filter on the back, maybe a fluval canister filter in the cabinet underneath the aquarium. I'm also liking the use of the white or tan coloured sand. Generally, I would say black sand or a darker substrate is really good at helping your tank to look nice and clean. So if you're slacking a little bit on the maintenance, it helps it to create that lovely clean look. But the owner clearly pays lots of attention to their substrate because it is looking very clean, and I'm sure the goldfish really appreciate digging and foraging through that to find any uneaten pieces of food. Now, I would always say when keeping substrate in a Fancy Goldfish tank, I would also keep it quite thin and a quite shallow layer, maybe 1 to 1.5, maybe even 2 centimeters maximum. This will allow the fish to be able to dig through the entire level of substrate, and it won't be too deep to create pockets of anaerobic bacteria or pockets where food can collect and get stuck under it. Also, I suggest not going for a sand that is too fine as well, as this can potentially sometimes clog your canister filters or the impellers of your filters. But I wouldn't go with gravel because generally there are quite a few people that have found having a larger size gravel can potentially get stuck in the goldfish's mouths. Overall, I probably wouldn't really change much about this tank. I absolutely love the scape, and I am definitely a sucker for the minimalistic bare look of fancy goldfish tanks, but I would say this is one of the first, if not the first scape of a goldfish tank that I absolutely love. Overall, there's not really much I would change. I would potentially remove the canopy if you could, and give the tank a rimless sort of look, but overall I'm going to give this tank a 4.8 out of 5 stars. Next up, we have a pond on the video. This one looks like it's got lots of water lettuce covering the surface. We've got a lot of different type of fancies. We've got some maybe Ryukin, Ranchu, Oranda. Maybe there's some other different varieties in there as well. I'm really liking the use of the pond lights within the system and those floating plants to really help reduce the nitrates and phosphates in the water. Looks like this pond is quite understocked from initial looking, and as the camera pans out, we're really seeing the size of this pond. I'm really loving the vegetation and the use of plants around the system. Although I do like that modern minimalistic look, as I mentioned previously in the video, I really love the use of different plants covering the scape, covering the outside of the pond as well. And I am a big plant lover myself, and I really like how they've created a modern pond. They've got that pre-formed pond, but they've sort of made it a little bit naturalistic. They've added lots of plants around it to blend it in with the environment, and I really like that they've done that. Also, we can see that this pond isn't very heavily stocked. Looks like it's one of those 250 to 300 gallon tanks or troughs that maybe farmers use. I think in America they have these large troughs or big tanks that you can purchase for cattle feeding or cattle drinking water, etc. And it looks like they've kind of converted one of those into a large pond. Looks like there may be 15-20 fish in there, nothing too hectic in that large volume of water. And I'm sure they've got a really large filter to maintain that absolutely great water clarity in this pond. Potentially, if I was to improve the pond, I may add some more plants to the outside, sort of cover the rim and the edge of that pond so it doesn't look like it's an actual tank that is freestanding, for example. Also, maybe look at adding a waterfall potentially. Not only does a waterfall provide lots of nice water sounds, but it also helps oxygenate and regas the water as well. So I'm not sure if there is a small one in the background, but I would definitely add a slightly larger one. Bring it in the back to make it nice and naturalistic. Add maybe a little rockery, build up a rockery behind the pond. That's potentially what I would look at doing. And here I believe is the same pond, but they've slightly changed its angle and slightly changed the look of it. But I would definitely look at adding a water feature, a waterfall into the back of the pond. And if I was to do a pond again, I maybe make it a little bit more naturalistic, maybe even adding some air stones, add a little bit more surface agitation, as there is quite a large coverage of vegetation over the system. But overall, I really like this setup, loving the quality of fish and loving all the plants. And overall, I'm going to give this pond a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next up, we have this really nice tank system. I'm absolutely loving the sort of rimless effect that this tank has and the absolutely lovely stand that has with it. I'm really liking the minimalistic look that the owner has provided. Really cool 3D background. It looks like they've got a really naturalistic rock style background. Loving the dark substrate as well. Dark substrate, as I mentioned, is really good at making your tank look nice and clean, even if you're not on top of that maintenance. Also looks like we've got a fluval aquasky light above it, and then a homemade DIY filter. Is that some type of basil maybe growing in the top? And it looks like we've got some filter sponges and some different ceramic media as well. One thing I would look at is maybe changing those rocks to something smoother, like some river pebbles, or maybe potentially changing the wood so it is nice and smooth so the fish can't bump into it, especially when they get larger and they get into sexual maturity and start potentially breeding in the tank. That is definitely something you want to look out for. Overall, I'm really liking the setup. I might change the scape a little bit. Overall, I really like the time and effort that this owner has put into this tank. So overall, I would give this one a 4 out of 5 stars. Next up, we have this absolutely lovely Tamasaba pond, similar to the Tamasaba we saw in the first tank. These are in a very understocked pond and they look absolutely beautiful, really, really nice quality. And as I said before, I absolutely love the vegetation on natural ponds, really loving the use of those plants draping in, creating that natural riparian buffer and riparian zone, which I believe the owner of that first pond we saw could have created to sort of hide the edges and the surroundings of the pond. I'm really liking the fact that this owner has given these fish lots of space, and the pond is really understocked. Now, normally I would say fancy goldfish are best as a species only fish. However, it looks like we've got some maybe rice fish or some small danios or something in the pond with these guys, and it creates a really nice schooling effect. Now, I don't believe the Tamasaba are fast enough to keep up and catch these guys, but I'm sure these small fish help to keep the levels of maybe mosquito larvae and invertebrates down in the system, maybe keeping the system nice and clean, eating lots of the bits of algae. I'm really liking the use of the different styles of plants, the plants outside the tank or pond, the plants which are submerged, the aquatic plants, and then also the riparian vegetation as well. But potentially I would probably add maybe a couple of air stones, although I'm sure this pond has plenty of oxygen with the plants and the low stocking numbers. Maybe I'd add a few oxygenators or maybe some air stones to help give more of a surface agitation, or have a bit of surface agitation which will give the fish a little bit of cover if there are any natural predators. Otherwise, maybe adding a few water lilies if you didn't want to add those oxygenators or aerators. But overall, I really love this pond. Really natural looking pond. Absolutely love the style and the setup, and I'm going to give this one a 4.6 out of 5 stars. So finally, we have the last tank on our episode. This one looks really nice. We've clearly got some very nice Oranda in the shot. We've got 3 nice Oranda. It doesn't look too overstocked, although this tank doesn't look to be a huge tank, maybe around that 200 litre volume mark. It looks like it's really well cared for. There is no algae, etc., no waste, no feces, etc., and the owner has really looked after it. I can see some Eheim air stones on the back glass. I'm really liking the minimalistic look of this tank as well. Looks like we've got a couple of filters, potentially canister filters in the cabinet underneath, providing lots of circulation, aeration, and also doing a great job at filtering the water. I really like how the owner of this tank has used a black background on the back, the side, and the underneath of the tank to really have a central focus on those fish. I'm also liking the use of the plant that they've put in, maybe a peace lily that the roots are going down into the water column. This is obviously helping to reduce nitrates and providing a little bit of natural cover for the fish. Personally, I would maybe add a couple of air stones onto the back wall, so give that little symmetrical look. Maybe you could look at adding a substrate, although I'm sure the owner of this tank has had a substrate in there before and potentially removed it, or potentially played with the idea of having a substrate in the tank itself. But overall, I'm really liking how this tank is laid out. It's nice and minimalistic. If you wanted to add a little bit of an aquascape, maybe a couple of round river pebbles would be nice, or maybe a sort of central featural plant, maybe a nice large piece of Anubias on some bogwood, something like that. But overall, I can tell these fish are of great quality and really nice health as well. So the owner is definitely doing their bit to keep these fish in optimal condition. So that is the whole overview of this tank. There is nothing much else to see. I really like to know what different filter medias they are using in their filter. But overall, the fish health looks really good. Potentially, I would look at maybe adding a few different ornaments into the system, or maybe a nice central piece of plant or some river stones, something just to maybe give the tank a little bit more life. But potentially this tank is a growing on system, and we can see actually there's no black background on the tank now, because I think the first clip was after this first one was taken. But overall, I really like this tank, and I'm going to give this one a 4.4 out of 5 stars. But personally, I'd like to add a couple of air stones to give a little bit of symmetry, and maybe some substrate or some ornaments. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of Rate My Tank, and hopefully you will stick with us to watch more episodes that will be coming in the near future. We will also be having a few spotlight series or a few spotlight videos on some of the ponds and tanks that we have seen in today's video. So be sure to look out for those on the next coming weeks on the channel. So that is it for this episode of Rate My Tank. If you want to have your tank featured on the channel, on the Rate My Tank series, or in our tank tour series, which is a slightly different, more in-depth video that we do, then feel free to leave a comment down below or email me at fancygoldfishfanatics@gmail.com, and I'll do my best to get your tank or your setup on the channel. So as always, thank you all for watching. Remember to keep those water changes up, and happy fish keeping.